What, 19,000?
Right.
What is
No, we'll do it together. Yeah. How's Canterbury? I think he's on the phone. Hello, Bruce here.
Oops.
I think she's just letting you in.
Just clicked it.
No, okay, we'll just wait. We'll just. Okay, see you soon.
Dean of Canterbury. What time is it?
Well, there's Tom Barrett's in front of the center.
I like your hat, Dean.
Robert. As soon as we get that Zoom sorted out here. Maddie will do it. So, okay, Maddie is sorting things out for us. Anyway, Dean Robert, thank you for joining us.
Not at all. It's good to be here.
Deacon.
Thank you.
Up here is our Bishop John Stevens, and so we're just so grateful that you've given of your time and we hope your wisdom in this session. And thank you also for the shout out this morning on your morning prayer that you'd be joining us here.
Yep.
So
just to say, yeah, welcome, Dean Robert. What a delight. You know, you kind of feel like you're meeting a rock star in the Anglican Church right now. With your, I don't know, thousands of people that tune in. Thank you for your ministry. There are people, of course, who pay close attention to the different animals, pets that wander in and out of your broadcast. But please know around the world that there are people who just absolutely love tuning in and also just appreciate the depth of discussion and theological, biblical, and simply just knowledge about the world. So we're so grateful for you joining us today, and what a delight. Thank you for your time, and we really look forward to what you have to say to us. So thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So the format, just so that everyone here knows, is that Dean Robert we have his 3 short addresses, if you like, reflecting on their time of doing the garden congregation ministry, reflecting on the nature of ministry in these days, and also on the nature of diaconal ministry. So, and then after each of the short addresses, there's an opportunity for us to discuss, to ask questions, to share ideas. And so what we'll do again for Robert, just to let you know, there's about 30 people here in person in the Synod office, and then another 12 to 15 on Zoom. And so we have an operator here who will keep an eye on those who are on Zoom, and if they raise a hand or wave, then we'll ask them to participate. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, very much indeed. It really is very good to be with all of you. And I'd be looking forward to this. We had a preparatory session a bit earlier on, and I said to Archie and Bruce that I thought it better to have just a break between each section of the talks that I was giving, so that you might want to respond, and we can have a little bit of discussion in between, and then we'll go on and fill our time usefully, I think, in that way. It will mean that you feel involved all the way through. So I was going to begin simply by talking about the way in which all this extraordinary ministry developed, really by complete accident. It came absolutely as a result of the pandemic and the situation we found ourselves in. Let me talk about my own ministry just for 5 minutes first, so that you see the kind of background that I'm coming from. I was ordained deacon in 1972 in the Cathedral Church in Lichfield. And maybe you've heard me say online at our morning prayer, and to what the people themselves have begun to call it, the term garden congregation certainly didn't come from me. It came from someone saying that in a letter and then me saying one of our people said that, and from that moment onwards it seemed to catch fire. And I have said in one or two of the broadcasts in the morning, the conversations that I feel we're having across the world, that the moment of being a deacon for me was the moment that the great change occurred in life and daily discipline, and the way I felt held by the office and the orders that I'd been given on that day. And we can talk about that a bit later on when we're thinking of the office and work of a deacon. But I was ordained from that cathedral church to a parish in the Diocese of Lichfield, and it was a town parish in the middle of Shrewsbury. However, now, some of you will know England quite well, but this is a town almost on the Welsh border, to the sort of north of Hereford and to the south of Chester. It's an ancient town, but it's never been a city and never had a diocese of its own. There is a suffragan bishop, as we call them, a sort of assistant bishop in Shrewsbury, but everything is under the Diocese of Lichfield. So I found myself there for 3 very useful years of ministry, 1 as a deacon, and 2 as, and I would want to say, a deacon and a priest, for I never forget at any time my deacon's orders. I find them to be strengthening and a particular beacon of ministry for me. And after that, I moved to be the lowest form of life, priestly life, in Salisbury Cathedral. I was invited to go there, and let me say that throughout my whole time as a priest, the situation has now changed radically in the Church of England, but I never applied for a job. We were just sort of quietly told that sometimes that this was being considered and what did I feel about it. But then things were done and one went to meet the people, but you didn't go to be interviewed and appointed to the job in that way by the parish you were going to. It was very much an episcopal activity of appointing people round. But by the time I got to be a dean, it was quite different. It was a crown activity. So letters would simply arrive to say, more or less, this is where you're going. And to begin with, it was ministry in Salisbury Cathedral. My first ministry in a cathedral at that time, but not as a member of the chapter, not as a member of the governing body, very much getting to know the folk there, teaching a little bit in the cathedral school, and helping the canon precentor, was a wonderful man called Cyril Taylor, C.V. Taylor, who is best known probably for having written the tune Abbots Lee, which is sung to quite often hear glorious things of the unspoken when it's not being sung to the Haydn tune, but is well known here. And he was a gracious and very elderly man at the time, but as with my first vicar, he taught me many things. And I was there only, again, for 3 years, but in those days it was usual to do 2 curacies, so that you were trained mostly in your first parish by the senior curates. The staffs were bigger in those days. And then in the second parish, you yourself were the senior curate. But in fact, I was what they call a minor canon in the cathedral there. And then after that, the bishop, just as I was feeling comfortable, the bishop, George Reindorp, at the time, after evensong, took me by the arm and walked me round Salisbury Close and said, I have just the place for you to go next. And I thought, oh dear, I've just got used to this. But it never pays to be too settled because the call will come to go somewhere else. And he sent me out to a parish, a village of about maybe 2,000 people in the countryside, 14 miles to the west of Salisbury in Wiltshire, south of England now, much more my part of the country. I was born in South Gloucestershire, near Bristol and Bath. And that village community saw its parish priest as an integral part of every activity that went on. And I had to get used to that I'd find myself going to the horticultural club or conducting a Gilbert and Sullivan opera in the parish hall or doing anything that my gifts would allow me to do. But I'd walk down through the village and ring the bell to say morning prayer, and some would come and others would know that prayers were being said. And I had 10 very happy years in that ministry with 3 small villages, each with their own church surrounding, but in one of them, a retired priest to help me out, and in the other, a full-time priest who was the assistant to the rector of Tisbury. So I found myself in a group of people, and it's rare in my ministry that I've had to work alone. But at the same time, my best friends were what we call the church wardens, who've been elected by the parochial church council and were there to advise me and also to give me a good talking to if they felt I was getting things really badly wrong in terms of misreading the atmosphere of the village community. And yet it was really a wonderful ministry. And I have so many friends still from that part of my ministry there. But then again, a telephone call came from the bishop. Before that, another telephone call had come from Bishop George Reindorp on a Saturday evening, which my parents were staying at the time. And I remember we were outside, it was summer, outside in the garden, and the telephone rang. And I went inside, picked up the phone, and a voice said, "Put your glass down and listen to me." And it was the bishop. And he said, "I'm sending you to the Sudan." I said, "Well, I've never been to Africa." He said, "That's why you're going. You will there have immediate impressions, and I want very much to set up between our diocese and the church in the Sudan." That was the whole Episcopal church in the Sudan in those days, this vast country, which was just coming out of civil war. "I want to set up a link, and I want you to go with the Bishop of Ramsbury. He will go to Khartoum and you will go to Juba in the south." And I had no idea what I was going to at all. And that's why he wanted that, because there would be fresh impressions. Let me say that those months were formative in my ministry. He supplied another priest, a senior priest, who had just retired to look after the village that I was looking after. And the village sort of kept me in their prayers, but also lots of air letters. In those days, there was no other means of communication in that war-torn land, which has just achieved peace. I just put that in because it was one of those dimensions which I think afterwards took me into national committees, which ended in me being here as well in the mother church of the Anglican Communion, which has the links with all kinds of cultures and regions throughout the world. So all of that happened within that compass of 10 years. And then I was sent to Sherborne Abbey, which was only about 20 miles farther to the west, big abbey church, but a parish church still. And there I had my own curates and also 2 school chaplains, again in a team, and a very supportive parish indeed. And just at the time when I thought, now I'm really settled here after 5 years and was enjoying the whole place and was thinking I can do easily 10 years ministry and more here. And at that time, sitting on the bed on a Wednesday morning, I used to take Wednesday as a day off in those days, and I went down to get the post, came upstairs, and a letter fell out of my hand from 10 Downing Street onto the bed. And it was a letter from the then Prime Minister saying he wanted to, it was a John Major at the time, wanted to put my name to the Queen as the new Dean of Hereford. And again, I thought, oh dear, I don't really want to move, but I had to go to Downing Street and would have to explain why I didn't want to move. And it turned that the Crown Appointments Officer there, after I'd seen the Prime Minister, was sent over to him. And he had a great file all about me. It was the way they did things in those days. And yet I didn't even know I was being considered. And then found myself, happily really, but it took a while to break the ties with Sherborne, but happily in my own part of the country again, in Hereford, which is the next door county to Gloucestershire, where I was born and brought up. And once again, like Tisbury, I had 10 years of ministry in Hereford. And having all those African links with Sudan and being on the national committee, which was called Partnership in World Mission, I was sent to organize the Hereford link with the 5 dioceses in Tanzania, which originally had been evangelized, shall we say, by the university's mission to Central Africa, and a very different, what we call these days, ecclesial tradition to the other dioceses, which had been evangelized by the Bible Churchmen's Society. And so one was very, shall we say it in old-fashioned terms, low in ecclesial tradition and simple in its worship. The other was extremely high, with bells and incense and berettas and everything else which had come from that. But I got to know them all and learned some Swahili and did all of that and went backwards and forwards many times when I was Dean of Hereford to Tanzania. So all these dimensions coming in meant that a different kind of ministry was building up. But I shouldn't have really thought that that was going to go on much longer than the 10 years. And just as the 10 years were approaching, then another letter from Downing Street dropped onto the bed in 2001 and sent me here. And I thought, well, Canterbury, I suppose, will be like Hereford, but bigger. And I was in for a complete shock in terms of the ministry, because Canterbury is owned by the whole world, heart and soul. And if I ever thought it was going to be mine or an easy task, that's not an unhappy task, but if I thought it was going to be an easy task, then I had another thing coming. It took me a very, very long time to go to bed feeling that my hands were around the compass of the ministry of Canterbury Cathedral in all sorts of ways. But on the other hand, I found people coming here whom I'd known in the Sudan as hardly priests at that time, just in training, who were now bishops. And they'd come up and shake my hand and say, do you remember when we went in that Land Rover that broke down in the middle of the forest, and so on and so forth. So all this sense of belonging to an Anglican communion, which we can talk about more in one of the other sessions, was there. And we went on through, and lots of tasks here, of course, a Lambeth conference to do. I've been through 2 of the archbishops, and was thinking in, shall we say, the 2017, 2018, when Justin had said, could you please stay on a bit longer, because I'm really past the retiring age of most clergy, but we've got another Lambeth conference coming. So I said, yes, well, let me stay on to do that. But could I just do Canterbury? I've done 30 years of the General Synod, and I feel that's enough London councils. But if I could just do Canterbury, that'd be fine. Not knowing what that would entail, because of course in 2019, at the end of the year, everything seemed set fair at Christmas time for a Lambeth conference in 2020. And then you know how things worked out. In early 2020, the pandemic swept the world. And at that time, everyone had to just decide where they were going to be in lockdown. And Fletcher came down from London to join me here, which was well, because we found ourselves actually not being able to work with anyone else. We had Archdeacon and canons living next door and across the precincts, but we couldn't even meet one another. We couldn't go into the cathedral, we couldn't meet one another. And on the first day that we were in total lockdown, it was Fletcher who said, look, it seems a pity that 1400 years of morning and evening prayer will be broken. And so why don't we go into the garden and we can say morning prayer, and I will bring a camera along, and you and I both believe, as we all do here, that Canterbury Cathedral is everything that happens within the walls of the precinct. So every garden is part of the cathedral, and the cathedral church is obviously the cathedral church, but it's not the sum of Canterbury Cathedral. So saying the office in the garden, to me, it made great sense. It kept the rhythm of life there. He said, I'll bring the camera in case 1 or 2 of the congregation might like just to tune in, because some of them will feel quite lonely and having the rhythm of life sort of taken away from them, and be disappointed that the church is not open at the moment. There was quite a contention about whether churches should be shut. The cathedrals are independent authorities in England, but we did decide that out of loyalty to the Archbishop, we would close the cathedral and behave as the rest of the church was doing. So this was a lifeline which went out. And the way in which it developed, we can talk a little bit about in our next session, but the way in which it developed was extraordinary, because all we did was to do in a simple way what we would normally do in an Anglican Episcopal office. We decided we would take our modern daily prayer, which is like an office book for us and has a richness of liturgical materials in it. And that's what we always use at morning prayer at Matins in the Cathedral. We'd use that and one short Bible reading, and we would follow the lectionary as far as we could, and on Sundays have special lessons, but the shape that we first gave it. And I remember the feeling of it being rather strange, standing there all by myself with Fletcher across the way. I think the first one we did was in the front garden, so that the tower of Bell Harry was showing. It was the Feast of the Annunciation in 2020. And I sort of nervously said, welcome to Canterbury Cathedral. We're going to say the office together. And then I think we then did evening prayer as well, because no one else was doing this in the precincts. So we did all the things and Compline on a Sunday evening to start with. And they were quite short, the offices in those days. They've expanded since. And at that time, we did a greeting, said if it was a special day, asked people to bring their own intentions and to have their own people that they wanted to pray for in mind. But I was thinking very locally at that point. And then after that, we would read some psalm. And generally, I aim not to read more than 20 verses. Normally here, our practice is to keep to the old Cranmerian sequence, so that we say all the offices for the morning on the first of the month, all the psalms for the morning on the first of the month, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then in the evening, 6, 7, 8 is sung by the cathedral choir. And on we go again, the second, and so on and so forth. And I've always found that a good rhythm, because I don't need any reminding what the psalms are after so many years of doing this in that order. I don't need a lectionary to tell me which bits of psalms to say. And so that's what we did, but we only chose bits of them, and the bits which we thought might be most helpful at the time. And then after the psalm, we read something from the scriptures. And to begin with, it was always a New Testament lesson. And we went up to Easter, giving exactly what the Matins lesson, the morning prayer lesson from the lectionary was. And then after Easter, we were given the most amazing gift by the lectionary, because it started soon after Easter with the Gospel of St. Luke, and it carried on through that. And it was a lovely summer here. It was one of the gifts of that year. We were all locked down. If you had a garden, it was lovely to be in it. And we have a 1.5 acre garden here, as you've seen, and to be in it and then to start using the spaces in the garden was a real benefit. But we went right through Luke, and I began to learn many things myself of the way in which Jesus, of course, mostly talking in the open air and simply looking around for illustrations that are there with people or plants or places or anything at all, really, utensils, and around us were all the same kind of things. And when Luke finished, after, I don't know how long it went on, probably about 2.5 months going through the Gospel of St. Luke, we went straight on into the Acts of the Apostles with the lectionary. And it gave a wonderful feeling of this huge corpus of material in the New Testament. I think 1/3 of the New Testament in terms of verses is written by St. Luke. And to have that going all the way through, and the imagination of that, the musicality, the artistry in terms of pictures and parables of St. Luke, but at the same time, the immediacy of all this going on in the Acts of the Apostles, and then that wonderful moment when it suddenly becomes not they, but we, and you feel Luke has arrived and he's now part of the team, but as a Gentile is actually telling a story in a way that we who aren't brought up in the Jewish faith might well need some help with. So I found that was the most beautiful gift to have. I've always been someone who's tried, and Rowan Williams was absolutely clear that if I would say, it's a special service, do you want special lessons? He would say, no, whatever the lectionary gives, we must use. And so for the whole of the first year, we stayed with the lectionary. The only reason I've departed from it now is because as people go back and tune in again to last year sometimes because they've got favorite bits, now it seems better to take things which people have not had any chance to think about. And so it was that a while ago, Fletcher said, why can't we do some Old Testament? And we began the book of Genesis. And I found with the book of Genesis, first of all, it was a wonderful book to speak about, but also the resonances into the Gospels and the epistles became very apparent. But also, shall I say, and I don't want to be a pejorative about anyone at all, but it's the society we're in now, the ignorance about the New Testament and things I took for granted was profound. Even from people who were themselves on Sunday mornings going to church. The culture of a constant Eucharist in the Church of England has meant that the Old Testament, which people would have mostly known from Matins and Evensong in the past, has almost vanished. So things that I would take for granted, suddenly I realized I had to explain or show in the explanation why they were at all relevant or significant. And that suddenly became quite a colorful picture to be using. So we've been all the way through the book of Genesis. And at the end, I thought, now, shall we stop? And again, we tend to talk about these things quite heatedly at some stage. And Fletcher said, no, don't stop, go on, because this is a story which has really sort of taken root. It's like almost like a TV soap opera. It comes in small episodes, and the characters there are a myriad of different things. And the duplicity of Jacob, who's the great hero in the middle of things, is something that is wondrous to behold. But the way God uses all these broken pieces became something that people really did go for and seemed to tune into. So when we got to Exodus, and Joseph had died, and then Moses began, it seemed the most natural thing in the world to get to where we are now. And so often, and again, we can talk about this when we're analyzing it in different sections of today, this morning for you, this evening, I keep wanting to say this evening, that at that time, it became apparent that so often the scripture was there as an absolute gift if you wanted to mix it with what was going on in the world, and if you wanted to mix it with anything that was being sent to you from concerns across the world with this growing garden congregation. We now have no idea, morning by morning, how many people are tuning in. We see only on our screens the English YouTube figures, but we well know it then goes on to Facebook, and then crosses the Atlantic and other parts of the world and goes into the Facebooks of their cultures, and TikTok and Twitter and goodness knows what. And from people tuning in from other areas of the world, it becomes apparent that there is an enormous take-up. And people do respond and write in. And my guilt is always that there is absolutely no time with the program, even more now that we've got the cathedral worship going in an ordinary way as well, to do more. But it still seems to be fulfilling a need. But the principles have remained the same. And what I would want to say is, and I'll say this several times, I'm sure, while we're talking, what I want to say is, this is not rocket science. It's actually the same ministry that I've always performed, whether it was in a cathedral church or walking around the village or talking to people about their concerns or reading the offices with them in the parish church. All of that is the simplest of ministries. And let me say also, and then we'll pause for a moment then and have some questions, but let me say also, this is not a priestly ministry. The only priestly thing I do is to give a blessing at the end. Everything else to me is diaconal ministry in this. The reading of the offices, the sharing of the scriptures, and the sort of counsel that one feels oneself giving, quarried from one's own story. I can develop all those things as we go on. But maybe, Bruce, this is a good time to pause and to take any questions. And if I think we can deal with that better, that will, when we're talking for the next 2 sessions, then I'll be able to say, right, let me infer that in. If they're easy questions to answer, I can answer them here and now. How would that be for you, Bruce, at the moment? Is that okay?
Yes, I think that'd be just fine, Robert. And so, this is our opportunity both for you in the room here and on Zoom to raise questions of Dean Robert. Maybe I can ask you, I was thinking the other day that you mentioned, I think when we met for our planning meeting, is that you've done 500 morning prayers in a row. And
that is so, yes, I think that's so. We started on March the 25th, and we had last year, and we haven't missed a morning until now. So I think that will be about right, yeah.
How do you keep going? I guess that's my question there.
Oh, well,
without a break.
Yeah, well, let me just say that we're here anyway because of the position of needing to be located in a way that I never have been before. And the saying of the morning office is a huge strength, really, so that the rhythm is there to keep me going as well as those that I'm speaking to. But I think that if we were doing anything that wasn't regular, is part of life normally, it would be fairly tiring. On the other hand, if you're doing something that is really like having your breakfast and thinking that this is part of the rhythm of the day, and I'm using things which are there for me, which the church provides, so that I'm still very much looking at the office book and going through that. And I give thanks very much for the way in which daily prayer, this office book which the church gave us from its liturgical committee, I think probably about 20 years ago in its final form. And so we got to know it quite well. And then the sense that people seem to want to know what you might be thinking about things. And I try to give it as broad a spectrum as possible, because we know that there are people watching from every ecclesial tradition, which we used to call churchmanship in the bad old days, but that sort of sense of ecclesial tradition. So I'm very easy on how I sit with interpretation, but I try to be helpful with the images given from experiences I've had across the Anglican world and the world itself, both in the United States, Canada, I spoke about South Africa, and certainly in New Zealand and places like that, and the islands of the Pacific, doing partnership in mission there, and in Hong Kong and Shenzhen in China, where we have a school, and worshipping in Hong Kong Cathedral. All those things actually help out. It's really like a conversation. And so at the end of it, by 10 o'clock now, I hand it all over to Fletcher. And he now has learned, and this was a completely new game to him, he has now learned to put everything online himself and to insert all kinds of pictures and complications, which then give a sense of what I'm actually talking about. Because I mustn't assume that things that I know well from my culture are going to be known well across the world. And so pictures and even little videos and things of that kind help a huge amount. They help me too when I see them later, but I'm not seeing them when I'm doing it. That's all his ministry at the computer. And it's a newly learned thing. Before, we used to send it to our communications department, and now we don't use anyone. We both of us are, shall we say, in a way, volunteers, because Cathedral doesn't pay me and nobody pays him. So it's actually a service to the church which is being given. But I don't think either of us find it arduous. Sometimes we think, well, that didn't go as well as we thought because of hiccups. I'll talk about the animals later, but they're a different dimension, actually. But what we try to say, we think about the night before a bit. I'm an early morning person. I'm not very good late at night. He is very good late at night. And so I, in the morning, do the thinking about what we're doing. And then I might take him in a mug of tea but there's not much conversation, before I go off to matins in the cathedral and then come back. And by then he's ready to film. and he will decide where we're going to film. He'll set the scene, and that makes it easy for me. I simply sit down and begin the office and use what's around. I sometimes get terribly told off by the director saying, I didn't tell you to do that. That movement's wrong, you know. So, but I'm very aware that he is the one who's looking with the eye of those watching. And also he very often responds to the things which come in, especially if there are situations of need and distress. He'll oftentimes, late at night, because the time scales, if it's someone in the United States or Canada, he'll ring through, or Brazil, he'll ring through and simply say, we are thinking of you, which is much quicker than actually having to enter a correspondence, because the next day will bring different concerns. Does that help a bit, Bruce? Sorry.
You took me to thought that the day that you presented from the compost box, I just kind of thinking maybe Fletcher was a bit ticked off at you about something.
I think some of the places he's put me in have been quite sort of heady for heights. And is there anything else now before we go on?
Steve.
Hello, Dean Robert. Deacon Stephen Bailey here. I was wondering, you mentioned it a little bit, responding to some people's needs.
Yes.
What other themes or motifs of common comments do you get on the various platforms about how people are receiving this and what it means to them?
We have, I would say, a huge amount of almost embarrassing appreciation for this ministry, which has held so many in places where the churches actually haven't, for very good reasons, haven't been able to keep going or start up again. And that's not just this United Kingdom, it's all over the world. And so the themes mostly have been themes of loneliness, themes of, oh, how wonderful to see a garden in the fresh air. And that might come from someone in an apartment in Singapore, with you know, or an apartment in a city in Canada, in Toronto, or in the United States somewhere. It might come from Brazil, and in that also quite often, if there's a tension within that society, if I think of Myanmar, Burma, then a letter coming from there would also have pain about the situation there. Same at the moment, I'm bound to say, with Hong Kong, where we have many friends, and the tensions of the world are there. So that to hold that in prayer, and of course the Canadian situation has been something we've been very close to all the way through. I feel that one is treading almost on holy ground when you're dealing with a nation's sorrow at a situation from the past. And we've all been through it in nations across the world. I felt the same when we were dealing with the 6th of January episode at the Capitol in the United States. And on that occasion, I remember in the evening here when it was all unfolding on television screens, and it was about 10:30, by which time I'm really zonked. And Fletcher kicked me and said, look, get up, you're going to go to the library, and we're going to make a film especially about this, of sending our prayers and our love to all our friends in the United States, and say, all our nations go through this. Please, you know, don't feel this is the end of everything, or that your friends aren't going to stand by you. And I had to be more than coaxed to go and do it. But in fact, it did give massive comfort to so many across the way. But you are walking in very tender areas. The minute you mention anything political, you really have to beware in a big way. And for some, it's been quite rare that that's happened. But for some, it sort of killed the message if you mention anything overtly political, because that's an area where people divide sharply. And yet, on the other hand, you can sympathize with the political situation or the situation a nation's in simply by being a friend who's praying and sending a greeting. There's that. There's also, of course, the fact that because they're not able to go to their own churches and have prayers said aloud for someone, to know that we have lit a candle in Canterbury Cathedral, or in exceptional circumstances, mention them in morning prayer. That has to be exceptional because, of course, otherwise we'd be praying for many, many, many on the way through. But it happens. What Fletcher has done then quite often is if we've gone across to light the candle, said a prayer in the cathedral, and he's taken a photograph on his phone and sent it through to the people to show what's going on. And even those photographs are precious of the one they're praying for being named at an altar here in the Mother Church of the Communion. So there's all those ways of responding, but I don't think that the kind of concerns that people are having would surprise you in any way at all. Some are particular to their own culture and political situation, and many are about health and loneliness.
Thank you. Thank you for the prayers you had for our deacon in Victoria, who was dying, and you mentioned her.
Indeed.
In morning prayers, yeah. Our deacon Ron Barazan, who's on Zoom, has a question.
Yeah.
Hello, and thanks so much for being with us and sharing.
Hi, Ron. Hello.
Fascinating. So my question is about this wonderful choice you made and continue to make about locating this ministry in a garden rather than inside a building.
Yes.
And I'm, to me, it feels very much like it's not just a pretty background for you.
Yeah.
It's altering the sense of gathering, and it's altering the sense of sort of who's included, which means that it includes the natural world in a way that we often don't when we worship out of a building. And I mean, I guess the question attached to this is, has this shifted your own sort of theology and ecclesiology, this going through this process of locating yourself in that place? And also, how important is that specific place? So you're now beaming all over the world, and your place is very different than where I live and where others live. So how important is it for us to sort of ground that kind of ministry in a specific place with a specific ecology and, set of brothers and sisters in creation, if that makes any sense at all?
No, it does make sense, and I will go into this in depth in a bit when we analyze what's going on. It has been life-changing. I should have said at the beginning, I spent an hour and a half this morning with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's here at present, and I said I was coming to you tonight, and he wanted his greetings and sent to you. But at the same time, he was talking about this garden ministry, and he said, this garden congregation, he said, this has really been an opening out of a completely new ministry for you, hasn't it? And I said, yes, it wasn't expected. And please don't think for a second that any aspect of cathedral life has been let go, because at 10 in the morning, as I say, I don't think about the garden prayers until the next morning when we go out into the garden, which is after cathedral matins on most days of the week, not Saturday, Sunday, but after usually. What we found, Ron, is at the beginning, it was the natural place to go because of the light. When it started, it was a good time of year and things were happening. And if we went inside, the cathedral at that time was cold because all heating had been turned off and lights weren't on, and there were no sort of flowers and there was no warmth. But then there were no people here either in the house, but there was warmth and colour and light in the garden of a different sort. And we had plentiful creatures that cause a rhythm to our day anyway. So we decided, well, especially said, let's just go outside and do this. It would be good to do. And then people can see the symbol of Canterbury with Bell Harry Tower. Now, that went on through when we couldn't go into the cathedral. When we started going back into the cathedral, people asked in great numbers. I wasn't thinking of stopping at that point. It was going to be a parallel ministry, but we're talking late last summer now. People asked in great numbers, don't let this stop, because we find just looking at, there was no congregation in the cathedral at that time, but the choir were there after a bit, and masked clergy sitting around the altar, all rather static. And they said, we don't feel that. Now, the extraordinary thing is, we don't feel that to be as intimately for us as the garden exercise. If anyone had said that about virtual ministry to me 2 years ago, I'd have said, oh, what nonsense, you know, doing it as we're doing it tonight, you and me. I couldn't possibly get that sense of getting to know one another in the same intuitive way. Well, of course, there is still a glory in the physical, but what we were allowed to do at that time was actually looking fairly static and posed. And now we do both things. We film in the cathedral. All our services are online. It's one of the gifts of the pandemic, and I can talk about that too later, because before that we had lay clerks. Our choir is, you know, clearly a choir of top quality, and as with Westminster Abbey and St Paul's Cathedral, the lay clerks would expect an awful lot more if their music was being sent around the world. And the pandemic was not kind to finances, because all income streams here tended to stop. And yet the lay clerks during the pandemic, when we said we'd like to film out, they said, well, that would be nice. And when the new contracts were written, there's now no question. They see this as part of their cathedral ministry. So the pandemic's been a gift to us in that. Nevertheless, there's still something about the garden and the way in which the Gospels and the Psalms and the prophets with their illustrations, and even at the moment dealing with the Exodus, is somehow more real when the wind is blowing on you and the seasons are changing around you. So let me go into that a bit more in the analysis that comes next. But I think it's a real question, and the Archbishop asked me this morning, has it changed in your mind what it means to be the church and what we should be holding on to and protecting? And that, I think, is quite a big question to answer. So thanks for the question. We're not giving it up. I'll come back to it as we go forward. So, and you can come back to me as well in the next question scene too. Thanks. Should we go on, or do you want to?
Well, one more question and then we'll move
Okay,
on.
sure, yeah.
It's Peggy Trendell Jensen, who you met in our planning meeting, who has a question.
Right.
You have to move forward.
Good morning. I just want to
I can
say,
see you now. Yes.
I'm just here to say, I'm actually going to hold my question because I think you're answering it very nicely. So maybe I will see you later. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. Shall I go on then and start to unpick bits of what Ron was saying, because it really is the heartland of this. What I'll do is say how it developed from that moment onwards. So now we're absolutely on garden congregation at this point. And it developed, as I said, with the rhythm of the office. And that has always, since my deacon's ordination and before, has been a precious thing to me. It's girded my day with a pattern. But also it is seasonal. When I was in Tisbury, which was the country parish that I was in, and used to ring the bell and all of that each day, morning and evening, and people would come and join me, just a few, to say the office there as well. There was also a wonderful Jesuit priest who was there with me all my time, because there was a local Catholic family of Lord Arundel, who lived at a house nearby, and they had always had Jesuit priests to look after them for hundreds of years after it was allowed back in England. And Father Tranmere, his name was, who was a great counsellor to me, and he was interested in the office. He said, "May I give you this?" And it was a set of the old Latin breviaries, which was fascinating, beautifully illustrated, and it's a precious gift that I still have on my bookshelves here. And what was interesting, well, I'm telling you this because not only because it's good to have friends in the parish in a different kind of ministry, and Father Anthony here at St. Thomas's over the wall here is equally a friend, but I'm telling you because the 4 books of the breviary were not, as they are now in the Catholic Church, and with ours too, set on the liturgical calendar. On the spine of these, and they're behind me on the bookshelves, on the spine is written autumnalis and then the Latin words for winter and spring and summer. And I thought, what a wonderful thing. It reminded me of hymn book committees, which I've been involved in quite a lot, writing hymns myself, but choosing what to put in a hymn book. I always had to begin by saying, okay, do we begin with Advent Sunday, as our hymn book, the English hymnal, does? Or do we begin, as Ancient and Modern always has, our other hymn book, with morning, and then evening, and then seasons, as belonging to the whole of humanity, and then go on to the Christian calendar? And I've seen that cause quite a lot of discussion in hymn book exercises, but I like the sense of the day being sanctified and also the seasons. But then when I asked about this, I realized why, of course, that can't happen now, because this was a set of breviaries in the beginning based on the Benedictine rule for the Northern Hemisphere. Fine for you and for me, where Easter is at spring, but New Zealand has an unhappy time of it when you've got Easter coming in autumn. And so that can't happen there, but it still happens in my mind that we're going through the seasons and they're helping us with questions about creation and life and all sorts of things that are happening. So that began to flood around me. The other thing which came to me as we did this on the way through is how much of the writing of the scriptures and actually the preaching of the scriptures is set outside, completely outside, or in a locked-in situation, which certainly isn't in a church. It's, you know, think of me as an ambassador in chains, says St. Paul to the Ephesians. So all of those things become really important in the garden, and seeing the fig tree beginning to put its leaves out instantly takes, or a sunrise happening with a red sky, and Jesus saying to them, you know, you hypocrites, you read the signs of the seasons, but you can't actually read the signs of God's plans for you, or the harvest, or all those things. That was outside. So it began to be very enjoyable, even on stormy days. And we rarely, as you know, rarely come inside. Sometimes we've lit a wood fire in one of the old parlors here, in one of the monastic rooms. They're beautiful fireplaces. And at Christmas time, that seemed the right kind of thing to do. And when we were reading books to help people in that really serious part of lockdown, and we read things that weren't overtly religious books. We read The Whole of the Wind in the Willows. We read Robert Louis Stevenson's Travels with the Donkey, and people would actually listen to that in the middle of the night. And people just by themselves, elderly people by themselves, said, oh, these books, when we read The Little Prince, took me straight back to my childhood. And we used inside to show a sense of comfort and hospitality inside, and the Christmas tree decorated. Or if I've used the piano, that also I've done inside sometimes, and people like being invited in. But I think meaning is given in a very different way outside. Now, if I come to the animals, they, believe it or not, were from the very beginning as much an accident as the starting of all of this. I can think of the very first time we had 4 cats in those days. My black cat, Monkey, died back in February this year from an embolism, but he was my constant companion, and he spurned coming on the camera. He wouldn't come much. He came once or twice, but he was very haughty about all this nonsense. But the one who adored it was Leo, to start with, and Leo just loved it. And wherever we were, he'd want to be around. And soon in, about 3 weeks in, maybe on a Sunday night, we were saying Compline in those days. And if it was still, we used to light a candle for those who perhaps had died of the pandemic, that people could then remember as they concentrated on the flame. And I was saying the Compline office up on the outskirts of the orchard, and the place was full of bluebells, I remember. and there was a wide table, and always is, you know, it's become a sort of trademark that we take morning tea into the garden and have that there as a sign of, you know, this is ordinary life going on, and we're breaking to say our prayers. So join us wherever you are, and if you're sitting at the breakfast table, that's wonderful, and people tune in from all different times of day. And then suddenly Leo leapt onto the table and was sitting there, and I motioned to Fletcher, because this wasn't a live broadcast, this is always recorded and put on. I motioned to say, shall we stop? You know, we'll push Leo off. And he motioned with his eyebrows, no, carry on. And at the end of the Our Father, I remember Leo yawning, and it looked as though he'd said Amen. And that somehow sort of unlocked an intimacy and informality which it was impossible to conjure by yourself. Now, I didn't know what was ahead at that point, because the time that the thing just went completely viral was when, on the morning we were doing the lesson about the four men, so we were into St. Luke by then, the four men breaking into the roof to let their friend down before Jesus. And I was sitting by the beehives, and we were showing exactly how we take the roof off the hive of bees in order to get to the honey inside. And Leo had been on the chair next to me, and then sort of ran away into the bushes and played around a bit, and then came back. When he came back, and Leo is actually quite grey, but on the camera tends to look black as my cassock, and ran back in, and I was wearing a serum cassock which flaps over, so there's opportunity to get inside it. And so he just ran into the cassock and disappeared, bang. And it, for some reason, became viral. The world needed cheering up at that time. And without exaggeration, that clip has been seen by 1 billion people. It went on, literally, it went on to every news channel. It was even made into a TikTok club picture for people to dance to, and everything else. It was an extraordinary exercise. And to me, it was the first of 3 or 4 of these things. People would write in and say, how do you go viral? The answer is, I absolutely haven't a clue. And nobody set it up. And that's the whole thing about it. But the animals can do that. And so we began to realize, first of all, how ignorant of the countryside people are, largely speaking, in urban societies. And that there's a sort of wonder and magic when suddenly chickens appear, or chicks are hatched, and they speak of life in different ways. And it didn't upset what was being said. It actually, in a funny way, complemented it. So that when we came to the point where Tiger was found to have cancer in his left foot in the front, and I said to people online, now Tiger's going to be absent for a bit because he has to have an amputation of his leg, and the vet has said it's best to take the whole leg off. The concern across the world was enormous. And people then began to write in and say, how is he today? And things of this sort. My poor PA in Cathedral House was having to have daily bulletins about this. And he became very reclusive and shy because we'd wondered whether to have this done. But his trademark, of course, had been to sit by the milk jug and put his paw into it to drink in that way, which again was found to be sort of comic because people hadn't seen cats doing that. And the day when, after his amputation, he recovered enough to learn to sit up like a rabbit and do that again, it was as though the whole world was cheering, and the thing came in. And for that, if you will remember, he was on the BAFTA Awards and got a little gold mask, you know, and that was another viral exercise. The other one, which is memorable, was Russell Crowe, our rooster, cockerel, we tend to call them over here, stepping forward when I was reading St. Peter's Denial, and I was reading the words, and at that moment the cock, and nobody heard crowed, because Russell had simply stepped forward out of the grass in front of me and crowed the loudest crow he possibly could. And people wrote in and said, how did you get him to do that? And I thought, you've never kept animals. There is no way that you can teach them to do anything. But in 500 broadcasts, of course, you're going to get things of that sort. And we found that it relaxes people to feel that they're part of life here, so that the garden doesn't become an unpeopled exercise. Occasionally, we've had other people in. We have a friend called Beryl, who is her home. She's a magistrate in England, but she and her husband, and he is an undertaker, a funeral director, but they look after animals that have been found and handed to vets, and the vets can't do anything about them. They need care. So baby hedgehogs and things of that sort go to Beryl. And we've had her in from time to time, because that, again, helps people understand the balance of the planet. And in a moment, we can come to the situation we're in at the moment with the COP26 conference. But my favorite email about animals was a man who wrote in to say, I tuned in for cat and stayed for catechism and have been with you ever since. And so the fact that there were articles about Tiger and Leo in the New York Times with photographs and all the rest actually was an advertisement for what we were doing, which I could never even have attempted in any way at all. But to my mind, it never detracted from what we were doing. That as long as one kept to the central message, people said, how do you concentrate in that way when that's happening? And the answer is, I'm perfectly used to the antics of animals, and the saying of the office and the thinking about that and talking to people while that's happening is part of my daily life anyway. And so focusing on that gives people a different kind of dimension. But when the whole garden turned into Narnia at wintertime, and every twig was covered in snow and shining in frosty sunshine, and there above me on the twig was a red-breasted robin singing his heart out. All of that was nothing to do with our creatures that we keep as domestic pets. They're the birds of the garden. And showing people how when water runs, because we brought water into the orchard when we came here first, when water runs, that creatures come and people are refreshed by it. The lessons you can teach from that, or the birth of the piglets as well, that was another sort of wondrous, I think it was a Saturday morning, when they all sort of stepped out into the world. And unlike human babies, within 10 minutes were crawling over me and finding, which teat they were meant to be using from their mother as she lay on her side. We're not skilled at pig keeping at all. It was just at the beginning. Tricia said, if we got a couple of coonies, it might be something that we could have as a bit of a hobby on the way through. And that's how they came into the garden. But 1.5 acres is no area to keep pigs in for long. And we've got a lovely young farmer called Jack, who facilitated this and then takes them off because they're very popular pigs to have as pets, coonies. They trot around behind you and so on. So when they start stripping trees to such a degree that you think, well, actually, we're trying to prepare the garden for the Lambeth conference, and this kind of thing can't continue. But nevertheless, on the way through, you've actually given people lessons in life, which many of them have never had, but others are reminded of. And the number of times people write in and said, this reminds me of a time in my childhood, and it's not necessarily the animals, it might be anything you say. You're remembering back to something that was happening. And you have to watch where you're going when you're as old as I am, because to me, the mid-1950s doesn't seem part of history, but to others now, and the time that I was most conscious of that was at 9/11, and we came to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And I was already Dean of Canterbury when 9/11 happened and flew to America quite soon after. But I remember standing on Ashford Station on the morning of 9/11 in 2001 and going to Paris. And I was in Paris in the afternoon when it all happened. And I remember that night at the little restaurant around the corner from the place where I always stay over there, the restaurateur would receive no payment from any American on that night. It was as though the whole world was sort of embracing that situation of tragedy. And I took that as a modern memory. But then I realized that the very smart young men who are the sixth form of our Cathedral School of Kings in their wing collars and black coats, and the young women who were in their black coats with their gold brooches, they were 18 years old. They weren't born when 9/11 happened. And perspective is something that you have to gain. So I now have to guard myself when I'm saying you will remember, and say some of you remember, or very few of you will remember, that all of that. But memories can be given as something from one's own history, or as something that you're sharing. So if it's 2 or 3 years ago, you'll remember the beginning of the pandemic, then that's a very different exercise. That's sort of now. Though we're finding, and let me come on to this now, because it's really been a lovely thing, that this conference about the care of the planet has really taken off. And having the little video clips of young people from India or Samoa or the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin and speaking in really cogent ways and being listened to by a whole world and getting a standing ovation from world leaders, and the constant drumming of the same message, whether it be from our 95-year-old Queen and our 95-year-old Sir David Attenborough, the great naturalist, and both of those are firm friends, saying we're not doing this for us, we're doing it for our children, our children's children, our children's children's children. All of that tunes in. And I was saying to Justin this morning, it's strange how in a very odd way, the very old have a perception which is both childlike and visionary, which tunes in with the vision of the very young as well. And in the middle are those who hold the seats of power, whose lives are taken up with process and resources and everything else. But here, it's suddenly been embraced by a whole world. So this here has, I think, taken over as the planet's agenda, where pandemic was the thing, the great thing, as the danger. Now, the danger is the climate change. And we have found that in doing this also tunes in with so many scriptural images. So if I go to this morning, when we were doing our morning prayer this morning, and that we've been doing Exodus, and we've got through the Red Sea, and you will see that we've come to this little passage about coming to the bitter, first of all, grumbling at Moses and Aaron because they're thirsty, and then coming to the bitter waters of Mara, and Moses putting the tree into the water to sweeten them, and the imagery of Christ himself entering the waters of the Jordan and stepping out and sensing the dove of the Spirit coming down, and relating that back to Genesis, which we were doing only 2 or 3 months ago, of the Spirit brooding on the face of the waters, separating the waters and creating life. And then going on to that oasis of Elim with the palm trees, the 70 palm trees and the 12 springs, and the likeness of that to the eternal word giving to the 12 apostles, the ministry, and the mission of the 70, and the shade which the palm trees are giving to that great hot wilderness, and the freshness that the water is giving to engender life. It's no wonder that little congregations call themselves very often Elim churches, because rather like the shepherds of the delectable mountains in the Pilgrim's Progress, they're there to give that kind of refreshment. And I found that doing that this morning simply was, and it was the reading in course in our book of Exodus. We didn't alter things, but it tuned so well with the COP26 Nature Day, with all that was going on at that conference. And I must say that we've listened to every word that your Prime Minister has spoken about that. And we well know of Canada's position in the forefront of this green initiative to make a cleaner, more habitable world for those who are coming after us and for all of life. And that has fitted like a glove into all of this. And it comes back, I think, Ron, to your question, that what does the outside give? And I think it actually gives a reality to so many of the scriptural images. So that if you think of Jeremiah the prophet with, watching the almond in blossom, or looking at the bowl of fruit where some of it is rotten, or Joseph's streams with the cattle and the wheat and so on, it actually enlivens that. But our Lord speaks constantly of this. And it's clear his mind is full of the Psalms and the ancient prophetic images. And I think being outside and seeing the seasons change help people to understand that. So that you get to that position in St. John's Gospel where it says, it was winter, and it was the Feast of the Dedication, but it was winter, or you get to the sense of St. John's Gospel, Judas went out, and it was night. So light and darkness, seasons, cold and heat, it's something we share in common with the whole of humanity. And you don't need to be a paid up Christian to have that spiritual dimension in you. So we really try to hold things in as wide and inclusive a way as possible on this, because I've no idea where these messages and pictures are going, but I want as many as possible to be comforted and healed by it. And I hope that you can't always hold the balance, because there's a measure of sort of, here I stand, it is a Christian message we're giving. But it has to be one where the sense of when I am lifted up, will draw all nations to myself, and the arms are outstretched wide, and their wounded hands, and all of that. I think it's easy to say outside, where no walls or definitions are confining that. Yet at the same time, there I am in a cassock, and I bless them with the sign of the cross at the end, and all of those things. So I don't feel we're selling the pass, but I hope that we're opening the doors. Shall I stop there again for a bit, because I realise our time's going on.
Sure. So any questions from the room here, or comments that you want to make? Okay, Steve, and anyone from Zoom that's put their hand up? No? Okay, Steve.
Thank you, Deacon Stephen Bailey again.
Yeah.
As you were speaking about the young people who are speaking out about the state of our world.
Yeah.
In the lower mainland of British Columbia, where we live,
Yes.
In the media, I see more Sikh and Muslim young people and very few Christian young people speaking out.
Right.
And I was kind of thinking, and you voiced it, that the whole ecology movement is a way into ministering to young people and showing them some of the relevance of the gospel. Do you see any other ways in which we can empower the gospel more to be salt and light to young people in our Western society?
I think that young people are talking about this climate crisis in a way that they weren't maybe 10 to 20 years ago. And if they were talking about it, they weren't necessarily being listened to, but people are taking it very seriously. And we chose to stop, because normally, we do dates and look back what's happened today. This is Guy Fawkes Day in England, and there are fireworks crackling away outside my window here. But we've decided we would stop that and just go through the COP26 topics as they open out. And this is day 6 of that. And we're going to go through with that till next Friday. I think that it's difficult with young people. The worst thing you can do, and we're surrounded by them here, because there's the whole of our King's School, which the Dean and chapter run. So I found myself as the chair of governors and owner of all their buildings and everything else. But I know them very well because they live in the precincts, and we have 2 huge sites across the city as well, and all their sports fields and so on. But there's also our choristers here, and we get about 130,000 in normal years school children who come from England and mostly France or Belgium or sometimes Germany to come, and they dress up and they act out with our schools department the stories that went on in Canterbury, and then we sit down and talk about it. We have seminars for older children in that way. But there comes a time, I think, when you have to respect people's pilgrimage to go it alone. There's a sense of Father, give me my share of the inheritance now and let me go off and find things out. And it's in the finding out that the need begins to rise. And we've found that when people tune in, it's very often from a situation of a broken family, or they're responding to something I've said about our homeless charity in Portlight. And social action is another way in which we find ourselves joining in with this, so that we have good conversations with the older students when we're out doing various things in the city for the city and for those who most need it, and out in the countryside too. But I think that the great thing about young people is that they expect the vessel to ring true, like a glass which isn't cracked. And if somebody is seen to be saying something and giving advice, but their own life and everything else belies that, I don't mean just by simple mistakes and the rest, but if the whole thing has no integrity, there's not much forgiveness in young people when they find that in those that would profess to be their elders. And so the best witness when you're acting along with them is to make sure that what you're saying, you actually do, I'm talking about social action, you do actually believe in and would go strongly for. There's no big recipe for this, or it's relational, and it's also in response to situations. Also, too much formality is not something. This is why the garden thing helps quite a lot. So that I've had quite a lot of young people saying, there was a dinner that I was at London about 3 weeks ago, and it was a very formal dinner at one of the Inns of Court, and there were brass buttoned servants of the Inns of Court serving us and the rest. And suddenly the waiter with his brass buttons tapped my shoulder as a young man I'd never met in my life before. And he said, "You're the man with the cats." I said, "Yes, I am." And we had a little chat there with much to the sort of frowning of the master sitting opposite. And but afterwards, I went and talked to him. And here was somebody who had actually just tuned in by accident because they'd been in a TikTok thing where they'd seen it on a club screen and so on. So it's back again, I tuned in for cat and stayed for catechism. And sometimes they do that. And if you've got a YouTube channel which is doing that, if there's so many of our stuff on YouTube and Facebook and so on, it almost comes up accidentally. If you're getting an awful lot of hits, then when you tune into Facebook, then the other things that are there as well. And so if the thing looks attractive enough, informal enough, friendly enough, not judgmental in any way in that way, but judging in an ordinary human way as you assess things, then I think you've got a key to the way things work. Now I'm talking from this culture across the Atlantic, so I'm not wanting to teach you anything at all except the experience that we've had here. If that helps a bit, Stephen.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Well,
Chris?
hello, Dean Robert.
Hello.
Chris McGregor.
Hi, Chris.
I want to use your phrase that you use so often, that I give great thanks for you. And personally, I think I might speak for the deacons here when you spoke from the compost heap.
Oh, yeah.
And you use the two words that resonate so deeply within a diaconal heart, which are encouragement and balance.
Yeah.
And as deacons, we live in a world that we are constantly giving encouragement, we live in a world where we are constantly encouragement either with words or our actions or our faces, our kindness, our just our being with people. And we also gain encouragement. But there are times when I know I need to go into that inner room and get that balance of removing myself from that, because it is demanding. And I want you to know that I've wanted to tell you this personally, and I'm so happy to have this opportunity to thank you for that, as well as all of the knapsack little tidbits that have gone into my spiritual knapsack and others that I have shared you with. So from the bottom of my heart, I give great thanks for you. So thank you.
Thank you for that very much indeed. Thank you. Shall I talk? We've got not too much time left for you, and I don't want to extend the session, but shall I talk about diaconal ministry a bit? Would that be good?
That would be great, yeah. Because I must admit, the first session I tuned into you was the day you talked about being a deacon. And so
I'm bound to say that my deacon's orders are the orders that I prize most of all. And partly it's been underlined by the fact that St. Francis never wanted anything but deacon's orders. And also that Nicholas Ferrer, who was the person who first formed a community after the Reformation at Little Gidding, also felt that all he needed was to be a deacon, which gave him the authority to do all the things that I've been talking about tonight. It actually is something of the pandemic, and perhaps I come back to Ron here, that the one thing that never seemed to work for me was celebrating the Eucharist in the garden, just there by myself, well, with Fletcher there, but not evidently there. Every office works really well, but the Eucharist is something that so much needs to be shared, and to be around the altar again is a lovely thing. It would be the same if it was one round in a hall or a table, but it is a very physical exercise. But a deacon's ministry, well, of course, that's a physical thing mostly, but teaching, we know, and the reading of scriptures and the sharing of experiences can happen in the way that we're doing now. And I carry that message very, very firmly from the pandemic. I know how it can happen now. And people also, when they are tuning in and watching and feeling involved, and then feel more than involved, they see themselves as what they've called a garden congregation, which gives a sense of identity. But at the same time, they are in a safe place. And in this world, that's quite a difficult thing to achieve. And any public assembly doesn't give you that same safe space. So that I would carry that from the pandemic as well, that when you're in a safe space, and Chris was talking about withdrawing into an interior mode, when you're in a safe space, you're actually protected, and you let the barriers down and begin to respond, even though I can't hear the responses. Rather like preaching from a pulpit, you have to imagine the response you're getting. It's easier from the pulpit because you can see the body language, but I'm actually not seeing. I'm seeing you now, of course, because we're on a Zoom, but when I'm filming, I have to imagine responses and then also guess them from the multitude of things that we've had in. It's always been to me a wonderful thing that at the wedding at Cana of Galilee, and some of you will have heard me say this online, the mother of Jesus, in encouraging Jesus to furnish the unknown bride and groom and the wedding guests with the wine that they need to make the reception go with a swing, and Jesus saying, "My hour has not yet come," and the Blessed Virgin knowing exactly what to do, and you know, saying, "Come on, you know," and she says to now I was going to say the servants who had the wine, in fact, in the Greek, they are diaconoi. And to me, that is very moving. They are deacons. And first of all, the Mother of the Lord says to them, do whatever he tells you. That's, I think, her role when I'm using the rosary, which I do constantly because I'm rather fidgety and my fingers take me through all the biblical scenes. And I'm very, Austin Farrer used to say, if you can't use Hail Marys, then use something else. It's a pity to give up a really good method of devotion, which keeps your body active and your mind active and frees your spirit. But that do whatever he tells you is the hallmark of the Mother of Jesus. It was said to the deacons, and they did what he told them. Now at the end, the steward of the feast calls the bridegroom, and it says that not knowing what had happened, says this is the best wine. He didn't know what had happened, but it says the diaconoi knew, which is incredible. They knew. They were those diaconoi were actually sharing in the messianic secret at that point, before the hour had come, even by doing what they should. And I said about Elim, the lovely oasis this morning, giving both shade and the refreshment of the water. And here are the diaconoi serving the needs of people according to what Jesus has told them to do. And that to me is a wonderful image of what it means to be a deacon. I hold that before me. But the other is we've got a new icon here in the cathedral, which was given to us when the Society of the Servants of Christ ended their work. It was a society formed by the imagination of William Temple, whose day it is today, an archbishop who died all too soon in the middle of the Second World War, who had such a vision for England and was chosen as archbishop by Winston Churchill in the middle of the war in 1942. He was archbishop for only 2 years. He had already established his credentials as someone who had a massive social responsibility on his heart. And a lot of the Tory MPs said, do you know what you're doing, Winston? He's not on your side. And Winston said, William Temple is the only half crown in a sixpenny bazaar, and looking at all the other bishops. And so he appointed Temple as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And then at that time, Temple wanted groups of people, they were only Anglicans to start with, but then other Christians joined them, to just sit in silence together in a space. Didn't need to be a church. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. And at the end of half an hour of silence, it was intentional silence, then they would each make an intention of practical help. So sort of diaconal ministry. And when they wound up, because their numbers had grown too small, they came to Canterbury and said, we've got some money left over. We would like to just be remembered by an icon. And we talked long and hard. And what we have is the most beautiful icon of the foot washing, just Jesus and Peter. And it is so, in the best sense of the word, attractive. It draws you to it. It's in the ambulatory in the crypt. And it's only been there, about a year and a half. And the puzzled look on Peter's face and his hand touching his, not my feet, but my head as well, as Jesus, and Jesus's hand is saying, if I've washed your feet, there's no need for anything else. I've given you everything. And Jesus with the towel is the other image of diaconal ministry to me. So that when on the day of the chrism Eucharist at the cathedral, when all the priests of Canterbury and many, many others come, because it's Canterbury Cathedral, all robed and around, restate their vows. In the old days, you stated your vows according to your order. So deacons would reaffirm their vows, priests would reaffirm their vows, bishops would reaffirm their vows. And I've always, as Dean of the Cathedral, insisted that priests stand up and reaffirm their deacons' vows as well as their priestly ones, because it's a very different kind of focus. And yet at the same time, that was when I felt this life that I've been talking about all evening began. And I take great strength from it because it's continued ever since. And that sense of the Blessed Virgin Mary saying, do whatever he tells you. and those deacons in service about to serve the people were the ones who understood not only where the instruction came from, but where the power came from to serve people in such a way with the wine of the new covenant given for the first time, because it was the best, as the steward said. I think that's all I want to say, but I hope it heartens you, because it heartens me always being with deacons.
Robert, if you have time, we have time for 2 quick questions from the...
Yes, whatever, I have, yeah.
John?
Sure. Again, good to see you, Dean Robert.
Yes.
So a couple of things. First of all, just to say, you mentioned Bishop Reindorf. Bishop Reindorf came and spoke in this diocese. You may not know that, but many years ago, mid-70s, I think, and there was huge gatherings around him back then. So that was really great to hear his name once again. And also, thank you so much for speaking about COP26. Often the church has been hesitant to say anything about the environment or the world. We've sort of known meetings have taken place, but we haven't always commented and felt we needed to be part of the conversation. So thank you for that. But my question is more around what I think you've opened up is some kind of connection to those who now describe themselves as the nuns, as in no connection to anything religious. No. And I think the church has been struggling with how to connect with some of those people, but somehow I think what you're doing has opened up a whole new path for people to feel a safe place to explore their own spirituality, their own faith. I believe there are many who believe in God, but aren't sure if being part of a church community is the way they want to express that. And I think that you've opened up something for them that maybe they would actually want to return to church to kind of further that conversation. I'd be curious if you have, anyway, I know it could be a long answer to a short question, but just some thoughts on that would be great. Thanks.
Well, no, I don't think it will be a long answer. Because I think you're absolutely right. I was looking. Yes, I've got it. I found it. I've got a friend who is what I would call a lapsed Roman Catholic in the States, who I knew from there. He was a young man, came over here, and I got to know him in London through a priest there. And the priest said he's wanting to get some experience of what religion and society and all of that. It was a very secular kind of interest. But anyway, he came to Hereford at that point, and he kept in touch ever since. And he now has grown on in, because that's over 20 years ago when I first knew him. And he was getting in touch. He's now teaching in a university in Missouri, and is fairly eminent, but he's not in any way a practicing Christian, though he used to laugh when because he came to Tanzania with me once, and I remember saying when he said, well, I thought you'd believe that or something, it was some point, and I said, well, I don't actually give that any credence, and he said, well, yeah, I thought you believe that. And I said, well, I'm only a marginal Christian in some ways, and that always always caused him to laugh. And so he was right. But anyway, he wrote last night because he's wanting to get in touch, and he was traveling to Michigan. And so the first bit of message is all about that and how he wants to get in touch. But then he says, by the way, your morning prayer, etc. videos on YouTube seem very popular, ! I've sent them to many of my friends and colleagues who have no real interest in the Church of England or religion or anything along those lines, but still the videos are very well received. Nice. And I don't know what that means, but it does mean, and that's not the only one that has said that people find it fascinating that there is this spiritual thread, this strand, which is a sort of gold thread going through, and for me, of course, makes up the trio of body, mind, and spirit, which Benedict speaks of as being better lived out in community, whatever that community looks like. But Joel saying that, he's a hard nut, and he's talking about friends who really wouldn't give that any kind of credence. But I've had it from all kinds of people, especially, let's go back to weddings, because the kind of weddings that happen here can be very smart weddings of people who have left this school a bit back and are now doing amazing financial things here, there, and everywhere. And the party gets going. And I tend to go, as priests tend to, from time to time for a bit, and otherwise it takes up the whole day and you've got nothing of Saturday left. But people sidle up to you and very smartly dressed young men and women come and say, we've tuned into things you're doing, and some of them are really cool. And that here is about the biggest kind of compliment you can get from someone of that age. But they don't explain it. But what it means to me is that it's something that people are quite shy about saying, but you get people writing in. This is why I say you're in a safe place. I'm not meaning safe danger. You're safe from ridicule for doing something which is grossly unfashionable. You're safe from boredom because you can switch off or speed me on until the next cat appears or something of that sort. And you're in charge with a virtual thing. Any of you, I mean, the host is in a wonderful position. You can mute people, and you can't do that very often in life. But you know, it does mean that you're in a safe place, in your own place. And sometimes you're there with others and you talk about it afterwards. And so many people actually tell me that we've got a great friend who is in New Haven. She's the wife of the Dean of Berkeley Divinity School, and she herself teaches art history in the University of Yale. And her mother is in Adelaide, and they speak from time to time, well, quite regularly. But she said before we had nothing to talk about, and now we talk about your broadcasts because we both watch them. And that actually that's been also a dimension of this, that people watch, and it gives them something to talk about across the generations, because you can pick which bits appeal to you best. And if it's one of the little video clips that Fletcher's put in, and so often, I mean, he this morning he had a Joni Mitchell song, Big Yellow Taxi, which he put in because it was like the Bumblebee song that ABBA dropped with their latest volume yesterday. Now that kind of thing wouldn't be natural to me. It's much more likely that I put in Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, but actually he slipped this one in, and somebody would sort of see it for that. So I think that's the key. People sometimes want to be anonymous, but that flower still grows, and just snippets. We were talking about the spiritual knapsack. People take very different sprigs of healing herbs from what they're listening to or seeing, and use it and remember it. And also the capacity to remember something that wasn't relevant then, so you put it aside, but suddenly you're at a time in your life when you think, oh gosh, that's what that meant, and I remember that now. And I think that we're just giving a complete spread of images, which is all that Jesus did, a huge spread of images, but rooted in something which was far, far deeper, and of the creation itself, the gift of the Creator himself. So yeah, I'd say that.
Thank you.
Wow.
Bruce, can I just, what?
Yeah, Alistair.
Yeah. Dean Robert, it's Alistair here. Thank you for this. I just wanted to thank Fletcher, who's, it seems to me, is his own deacon in that sense. So if he's there or whatever, but just.
No, he's not here at the moment, but I can thank him later on. So.
Please, thank you.
Yeah. He's not someone who likes to be seen a great deal.
Well, Robert, thank you ever so much for joining us today. Thank you for gracing us with your presence and being so generous with your time, and blessing us with your wisdom, which takes us to places that I'm sure we'll be thinking about this for months ahead. Just thinking, yes, okay, and now, thank you for inspiring us to look at our vocations with new eyes and reaching out in new ways to the world around us. And for helping us understand what it is to walk with Christ and all that means in this life and in this ministry. And may God continue to bless you and Fletcher in your ministries and the gifts that you are to all of us, and to this world in this time. So, Thank you.
Well, thank you. It has been a great privilege and a benefit to me as well, always, this kind of thing. So keep in touch. And if any of you are in Canterbury, come and see us, please.
Yes.
Bye.
Hey, folks, and just some things. We're just going to break for lunch. And just before we do break for lunch, there's 3 items. One is that Karen Saunders, if you're prepared, is going to speak to us about newsletter for a moment here.
Just very briefly, I'd like to remind everybody of the existence of the Deacons Beacon. We've put out our first copy, but we would love more articles. If you are doing something that you would like the community to know about, if there's something you'd like to share, please feel free to write it up, and you can send it to me or to anyone else on the committee. If you don't have my email, Martha is the other editor. So please keep those cards and letters coming.
Okay. Thank you. And while the deacons here at the Synod office go and feast at Betty's table, I'd encourage you on Zoom, those of you who are able to stay for the garden ministry sessions after lunch, to just stay on, and Maddie at the Zoom operating table will organize you into where you want to be so that you get to go where you want to go. And one last thing, it's Leah's birthday, I hear. Is that true?
Today.
Wow.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Leah. Happy birthday to you.
Peggy, Alistair, do we have something to lead us into lunch?
Oh, yeah, we do, don't we?
Oh, okay.
Before we do
Yeah,
that.
yes, Jennifer.
I have in my bag of tricks here,
Ooh.
clergy shirts, brand new clergy shirts. They are women's, size 14, and I believe I have one 16. So I've got black and blue. Anybody would like them, they're yours.
Oh, that's generous.
Fit around my thighs.
Yeah. Sorry, man, these are women.
We take off the darts. Okay.
So as a reminder, the psalm to lead us into lunch is in the back of your agenda.
We stand.
And you did so well last time. The folks on our right will be on the light with Peggy, and the folks on our left will be bold.
Okay, verses from Psalm 133. Behold how good
It is like the precious oil upon the head, running down upon the beard.
Running down upon the collar of his clothing.
It is like the dew of Hermon, running down on the hills of Zion.
For there the Lord has promised his blessing, even life forevermore.
Glory to God, source of all being, eternal Word and Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever. Amen.
Let's see. Yeah.
People on Zoom, can you hear me? Just one second. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me on Zoom? Yes. Okay, great. So if you haven't told me already, can you tell me which what you'd like to sign up for? So if Anne is there, do you know what you want to do?
Yeah, I'd like to do the truth and reconciliation.
Okay.
The community.
Oh, 1 second, my pen. Okay, so truth, community, and what's your third one?
Climate.
Great. How about Jeanette? Do you know what you want to do?
She's no longer with us.
Oh, she's not, okay. I'll cross her off my list for now. Karen, what do you want to do? Is Karen there? Oh, you're muted, Karen, so I can't hear you.
Right.
There we go.
The TRC, the community partners, and the chaplaincy, please.
Okay, thank you, Karen. How about Linda? Are you there?
Nope.
Not Linda? Okay, Margaret? Oh, you have to unmute there so I can hear you.
I actually didn't hear what the choices were.
Okay, just 1 second. Okay, so the choices are truth and reconciliation, community partnership, climate, chaplaincy, and street outreach.
Climate,
Okay.
chaplaincy, and truth and reconciliation.
Okay, how about Melody? Are you there?
Yep.
I'm here, but I won't be able to stay, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. Wally, do you know what you'd like to do?
Yeah, the TRC,
Okay.
climate, and street outreach.
Okay, and Kevin, I think I saw yours in the chat. Oh, you can't, you're not there. Okay, I think that's everybody, unless you are here and haven't told me.
I'm here and haven't told you.
Oh, okay. Who is this?
It's Amanda.
Oh, sorry, I think I just threw you in because you said, but I'll cross yours off. And what would you like to do?
Well, I didn't have the list either, but now that I do, I'm interested in the community partnership one. Chaplaincy and street outreach.
Chaplaincy. Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, so I think that's it, unless someone hasn't told me. But I'll get you ready to go in the room, so you'll just show up there hopefully once we start. Thank you.
And we're restarting at 1:45.
As far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you guys later.
Bye.